Case 1. Kyle Ryans became the center of one of Pennsylvania's most closely watched murder cases of 2025 after a family argument inside a Chester home ended in gunfire. On the night of October 22, 2025, police were called to the 500 block of Dorian Drive in Chester following reports of a domestic-related shooting. When officers arrived, they found Corey Ryans, 35, suffering from a gunshot wound to the neck. Despite emergency medical efforts, Corey was pronounced dead at the scene. His brother, Kyle Ryans, 36, was taken into custody and later charged with first-degree murder. What initially appeared to be another tragic domestic dispute has since taken on deeper legal complexity as new testimony emerged in court. According to investigators and prosecutors, the confrontation unfolded inside the home during what began as a verbal argument over food. Court testimony presented during a December 2025 hearing indicated the disagreement escalated rapidly, involving multiple people inside the residence. Voices were raised, tensions increased, and the situation moved from argument to violence in a matter of moments. Police records confirm that 2 people were shot during the incident. Corey Ryans suffered a fatal gunshot wound to the neck. Another individual, identified in court as a family-related associate, was struck in the hand and survived. Officers secured the scene, cleared the home for safety, and began documenting evidence as neighbors gathered outside, stunned by the sudden police presence on the quiet residential block. As detectives reconstructed the sequence of events, prosecutors introduced a critical theory that now defines the case: transferred intent. According to court filings and testimony, the state alleges that Kyle Ryans was not aiming at his brother when the fatal shot was fired. Instead, prosecutors claim the evidence shows he was allegedly attempting to shoot his sister's boyfriend during the heated confrontation. The shot missed its intended target and instead struck Corey Ryans, killing him. Under Pennsylvania law, prosecutors argue that intent can legally transfer from the intended target to the actual victim, forming the basis for a first-degree murder charge. This theory significantly shapes how the case is being prosecuted. First-degree murder requires proof of specific intent to kill, and prosecutors maintain that the alleged attempt to shoot another person satisfies that requirement, even though the fatal bullet struck someone else. Defense attorneys have not publicly detailed their full strategy, but are expected to challenge both intent and the interpretation of events as the case proceeds. Kyle Ryans was arrested at the scene without incident. Court documents show that he was charged with a wide range of offenses, including criminal homicide, first-degree murder, third-degree murder, voluntary manslaughter, involuntary manslaughter, aggravated assault, and multiple firearms-related offenses. A judge ordered him held without bail, citing the seriousness of the allegations. He has remained detained at George W. Hill Correctional Facility in Delaware County while the case moves through pre-trial proceedings. The family relationship between the accused and the victim has weighed heavily over every court appearance. Corey Ryans was not an outsider caught in a random act of violence. He was a brother, present during a family dispute that spiraled out of control. Prosecutors have not alleged long-term planning, but they argue the escalation of the argument, combined with the use of a firearm, meets the legal threshold for first-degree murder under the transferred intent doctrine. As the case advanced into late 2025, courtroom testimony added clarity but also raised difficult questions. Prosecutors presented evidence outlining the argument over food, the movement of people inside the home, and the trajectory of the bullets fired. These details were introduced to support the state's claim of intent and to explain how Corey Ryans became the unintended victim of the shooting. Next steps as of 2026. Court records confirm that Kyle Ryans remains in custody, and the case is active within the Delaware County court system. His formal arraignment is scheduled for January 28, 2026. During that proceeding, prosecutors are expected to formally outline the charges and legal theories, while the defense will preserve its right to challenge the allegations through motions and future hearings. No trial date has yet been announced. Throughout every stage of the proceedings, the court has emphasized a foundational principle of the justice system. Kyle Ryans is presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty in a court of law. The burden remains on prosecutors to prove intent, causation, and responsibility beyond a reasonable doubt. The death of Corey Ryans has left a family grieving and a community shaken. What began as an argument over something as ordinary as food ended with one life lost and another forever changed as one of the most complex murder cases in Pennsylvania in 2025. If you're a true crime lover who enjoys watching murder documentaries like this one, please support my channel by hitting the like button and subscribing. Thank you very much. Case 2. Detective Sergeant Cody Becker, Detective Mark Baker, and Detective Isaiah Emenheiser left for work on September 17, 2025, expecting to carry out another law enforcement assignment. By the end of that afternoon, all three men were dead, killed during a calculated ambush that would become one of the deadliest law enforcement attacks in Pennsylvania that year. The shooting unfolded in North Cotterus Township, where officers from multiple agencies had been dispatched to serve court-approved warrants tied to a domestic-related investigation. Authorities later confirmed the suspect was Matthew James Ruth, a 24-year-old from Hanover. All three fallen officers served with the Northern York County Regional Police Department. Between them, they carried more than 5 decades of law enforcement experience that still could not protect them from what was waiting at the property that afternoon. Cody Becker, 39, was a detective sergeant and a 16-year veteran of the department. He was known as a steady leader who trained younger officers and took responsibility seriously. Mark Baker, 53, brought 21 years of law enforcement service, including prior work with the Philadelphia Police Department. He was among the most experienced officers on the team. Isaiah Emenheiser, 43, had served 20 years in law enforcement and was widely respected for his professionalism and calm judgment. On that September afternoon, the three responded together, just as they had many times before. Shortly after 2 p.m., officers arrived at a residence in North Cotterus Township to execute the warrants. Investigators later confirmed that Ruth had been stalking an ex-girlfriend and that the residence officers approached belonged to her. Authorities emphasized that the operation was lawful, authorized, and conducted according to standard procedure. What officers did not know was that Ruth had prepared for a violent confrontation. According to investigators, Ruth was armed with an AR-15 style rifle equipped with a suppressor. He had positioned himself to attack officers as they approached, giving him a tactical advantage. As officers moved toward the property, Ruth opened fire almost immediately, launching a sudden and deadly ambush. The suppressor reduced the initial audible warning of gunfire, contributing to the speed and effectiveness of the attack. Within seconds, radio transmissions captured urgent calls for help as officers took cover and returned fire. The scene descended into chaos as additional units rushed toward the location. Detective Sergeant Becker, Detective Baker, and Detective Emenheiser were struck during the opening moments of the ambush. Emergency medical aid was rendered at the scene, and responders worked urgently to transport the wounded. Despite those efforts, all three officers later died from their injuries. 2 additional officers were also shot during the exchange. They were rushed to nearby hospitals, where trauma teams worked to stabilize them. Authorities later confirmed that both wounded officers survived. As the confrontation continued, responding officers returned fire. More law enforcement units flooded the area, securing the perimeter and working to stop the threat. The standoff ended when Matthew James Ruth was fatally shot by responding officers at the scene. Authorities later confirmed that Ruth acted alone and that no civilians were injured during the incident. By late afternoon, the neighborhood was sealed off as investigators began the difficult work of reconstructing what had happened. Evidence markers lined the ground. Ballistics teams documented shell casings. Body-worn camera footage and radio logs were collected for review. A multi-agency investigation was launched to examine the timeline, the suspect's preparations, and the officer's response. As word spread across York County, grief moved faster than official briefings. Police departments across Pennsylvania lowered flags to half-staff. Officers from neighboring jurisdictions arrived in quiet convoys. Outside police stations and hospitals, residents gathered with candles, flowers, and handwritten messages. Many had never met Becker, Baker, or Emmenheiser, yet their loss felt deeply personal. State leaders confirmed the deaths later that evening, calling the fallen officers dedicated public servants who died in the line of duty. Officials emphasized that the warrants were valid and that officers were carrying out their responsibilities when the ambush occurred. Authorities avoided speculation, focusing instead on honoring the victims and supporting their families. In the days that followed, funeral services for the three officers drew thousands of mourners. Law enforcement personnel from across Pennsylvania and beyond stood shoulder to shoulder, lining streets as patrol vehicles passed. Families spoke of men defined not only by their badges, but by their lives outside the uniform, fathers, partners, friends, and mentors who never hesitated to answer the call. The two wounded officers continued their recovery as departments pledged full medical, emotional, and financial support. Meanwhile, investigators continued reviewing every element of the encounter, including how Ruth prepared for the ambush and how officers responded under extreme pressure. In Pennsylvania, September 17, 2025, became a day etched into memory, not because of randomness or chaos, but because three experienced officers were killed while doing exactly what they had trained for their entire careers. The ambush underscored the dangers officers face when responding to domestic-related cases, particularly those involving stalking and escalating threats. Case 3. Diana Gravola was 57 years old when police say her family home in Secane, Pennsylvania, became the scene of one of the most disturbing homicide cases in the state in 2025. Just days before Christmas, what should have been an ordinary return home after work turned into a discovery that would permanently alter one family and shock an entire community. The case, now expanded by additional charges and newly reported details, stands out for both its brutality and the deeply personal relationships at its center. The victim was Gravola's 23-year-old daughter, who police say was stabbed to death inside the family's residence in Secane. According to reports and police affidavits, the homicide occurred in mid-December 2025, only days before Christmas. The timing alone drew intense public attention, but the way the crime was discovered added another layer of devastation. Investigators say the scene was discovered by John Gravola, the victim's father, and Diana Gravola's husband. According to police, he returned home from an overnight work shift in the early morning hours. Some reports state he worked at Philadelphia International Airport, while others list his employer as UPS, but all accounts agree on the central detail. When he entered the home, he found that something was terribly wrong. Inside, he discovered his daughter had been fatally stabbed. Police allege that before officers arrived, Diana Gravola made a direct statement to her husband. According to court documents cited in media reports, she allegedly told him, "I stabbed our daughter." That statement, reported as part of the probable cause narrative, became a key element in how investigators understood the moments immediately following the killing. Emergency responders were called, but the young woman could not be saved. When police arrived at the Secane home, they encountered a scene that investigators later described as extreme. Officers reported that Diana Gravola was found naked and covered in blood. The condition she was in, combined with the location of the victim and the physical evidence inside the house, led investigators to immediately treat her as the primary suspect rather than a witness. She was taken into custody at the scene. As detectives continued to assess the home, they uncovered another disturbing detail. In addition to the fatal stabbing of her daughter, Gravola was also charged with aggravated cruelty to animals. Police allege that during the same incident, she stabbed the family's 3-year-old mixed-breed dog, Ezra. Unlike the human victim, the dog survived the attack. Ezra was rushed to an emergency veterinary clinic where the animal received treatment and later recovered. Prosecutors added the animal cruelty charge after confirming veterinary reports and physical evidence. The inclusion of the animal cruelty charge expanded the scope of the case and further underscored the violent nature of the incident. Authorities stated that both charges stemmed from the same sequence of events inside the home. While prosecutors did not publicly describe the order in which the attacks occurred, they emphasized that the evidence supported multiple felony charges tied to a single incident. According to police affidavits, Diana Gravola allegedly made another statement after officers arrived. Investigators reported that she told police, "Sorry, I should have stabbed myself first." That alleged remark was widely reported and cited in court documents as part of the probable cause for her arrest. Prosecutors later clarified that the statement was not being presented as a confession in itself, but as one of several factors supporting the decision to file the most serious charges available under Pennsylvania law. Gravola was formally charged with first-degree murder, which alleges an intentional killing and carries a potential sentence of life imprisonment if a conviction is obtained. The added charge of aggravated cruelty to animals also carries significant penalties. At the time of her arrest, authorities stressed that Gravola had not been convicted and that all charges remained allegations to be proven in court. Police did not publicly release a motive for the killing. Investigators and prosecutors avoided speculation, offering no details about possible arguments, mental health history, or prior domestic incidents. There were no public records released indicating previous police calls to the home. Officials limited their statements to what could be confirmed through evidence collected at the scene and through affidavits. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for your support. Case 4. Jose Luis Rodriguez became the name tied to one of the most harrowing murder cases Pennsylvania faced in 2025, a case that investigators say unfolded over 2 days and ended with the destruction of an entire young family in Berks County. Prosecutors allege that Rodriguez carried out the killings in a calculated sequence, taking the lives of 31-year-old Geraldina Peguero Mancebo, her 1-year-old son Jaden Jr. Peguero, and, hours later, her 31-year-old husband Junior Cabrera Colon. What made the case especially devastating was not only the number of victims, but the fact that a baby was among them. According to investigators, the timeline of the crimes began on September 12, 2025. Court filings later stated that Geraldina Peguero Mancebo and her infant son were killed first. Police allege that Rodriguez attacked Geraldina and then took her child from the home. An autopsy later confirmed that 1-year-old Jaden died from freshwater drowning after being thrown into a marsh. That finding, released after forensic testing, became one of the most disturbing details of the case and sharply shifted public understanding of what happened. Authorities said the child was alive when he entered the water, a conclusion based on medical evidence presented to the court. The following day, on September 13, 2025, investigators say Rodriguez returned and killed Junior Cabrera Colon. Police responding to the residence discovered Cabrera Colon's body inside the home with a fatal gunshot wound. At that moment, officers believed they were dealing with a single homicide, but the absence of Geraldina and baby Jaden immediately raised alarms. Within hours, the investigation expanded into a missing mother and child case layered on top of a murder scene, triggering widespread concern across Berks County and beyond. As police retraced the family's last known movements, detectives identified Jose Luis Rodriguez, a 61-year-old man with a personal connection to Geraldina, as a key suspect. Authorities have been careful not to publicly define the full nature of that relationship, but prosecutors confirmed it was direct and personal, not random. With time becoming critical, law enforcement agencies coordinated searches across rural and residential areas, focusing on locations tied to Rodriguez's movements in the days surrounding September 12th and 13th. On September 19, 2025, investigators located the body of Geraldina Peguero Mancebo in Ontalone Township. The discovery confirmed the worst fears of her family and shifted the case irreversibly into a multi-victim homicide investigation. 1 day later, on September 20th, search teams recovered the body of 1-year-old Jaden Jr. Peguero from a marshy area nearby. Authorities later confirmed that the location and condition of the child's body aligned with forensic findings about the cause of death. With all 3 victims recovered, prosecutors moved quickly. Jose Luis Rodriguez was arrested and formally charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder, along with additional offenses, including abuse of a corpse. Charging documents alleged that the killings were intentional, sequential, and connected, supported by physical evidence, forensic findings, and investigative timelines. Rodriguez was denied bail and held in custody as the case proceeded through the Pennsylvania court system. As the legal case advanced in late 2025, prosecutors released additional clarifications that reshaped how the public understood the crime. Investigators confirmed the order of deaths, stating that the mother and child were killed first on September 12th, followed by the husband on September 13th. That sequence, prosecutors said, was supported by digital evidence, forensic analysis, and witness timelines. The confirmation of the baby's cause of death, freshwater drowning, further intensified public reaction and placed the case among the most severe child homicide prosecutions in the state that year. The human toll behind the court documents became impossible to ignore. Geraldina Peguero Manchebo was remembered by family members as a devoted mother who centered her life around her child. Junior Cabrera Colon was described as a hardworking husband who supported his family and stayed close to relatives. Photos shared by loved ones showed baby Jaden smiling, crawling, and clinging to his parents, ordinary moments that now carried unbearable weight. Prosecutors emphasized that the charges reflect not just the loss of 3 lives, but the vulnerability of the victims, especially the child. By late 2025, the Berks County District Attorney's Office confirmed another critical development. Prosecutors were considering pursuing the death penalty. Officials stated that the nature of the crimes, the number of victims, and the circumstances surrounding the child's death met the legal threshold for capital punishment consideration under Pennsylvania law. While no final decision had been announced by the end of the year, the statement signaled how seriously prosecutors viewed the case. As of when this video was uploaded, Rodriguez remained incarcerated as preliminary hearings continued. Defense attorneys had not publicly challenged the identities of the victims or the basic timeline of discoveries, though future proceedings were expected to examine evidence, intent, and legal responsibility in detail. Case 5. Ann Turner was 89 years old when her life ended violently inside her own home in Hilltown Township, a quiet community where serious crime is rare. On July 10, 2025, concern began ordinarily. Ann failed to show up for a planned meeting that evening. Friends and neighbors knew her as reliable and punctual, someone who did not simply forget commitments. When phone calls went unanswered, worry quickly replaced patience. A neighbor went to check on her home, not expecting danger, but hoping to find an explanation. Instead, the neighbor made a discovery that would shock the entire township. Ann Turner was found shot to death inside her home on Rickert Road. Police were called immediately, and officers arrived to secure the scene. Investigators confirmed she had suffered gunshot wounds to the chest and back, and her death was ruled a homicide. What should have been a routine welfare check became the starting point of one of the most unsettling murder cases Pennsylvania saw in 2025. Hilltown Township is known for its quiet streets and close-knit feel. Neighbors often recognize one another by name, and many residents leave doors unlocked out of habit. That context made the crime especially disturbing. An elderly woman had been killed in her own kitchen, in a place where she should have been safest. Authorities stressed early on that homicides are extremely rare in the area, underscoring just how unusual the case was. Detectives began working backward, carefully reconstructing Ann Turner's final hours. They focused on the timeline leading up to the missed meeting that raised the alarm. Police confirmed that Ann was discovered around 7:30 p.m. after she did not arrive as planned earlier that evening. Investigators believe that missed appointment likely prevented her death from going unnoticed for much longer. It was a small break from routine that revealed a devastating crime. As the investigation unfolded, police examined the home for signs of forced entry. Early reports indicated no obvious signs of forced entry, a detail that complicated the case. That raised difficult questions. Did Ann know the person who entered her home? Was the door unlocked, as it often is in quiet communities? Or did the killer gain access without leaving clear signs behind? Investigators have not publicly answered those questions, but each possibility shaped how detectives approach the case. The Bucks County District Attorney's Office joined Hilltown Township Police in leading the investigation. Detectives canvassed the neighborhood, speaking with residents along Rickert Road and nearby areas. They asked neighbors to think carefully about that day. Unfamiliar cars, unusual sounds, or anyone seen walking or stopping near Ann's home. Officers also began reviewing any available surveillance footage from nearby properties, knowing that even a brief clip could provide a crucial lead. As weeks turned into months, the lack of an arrest weighed heavily on the community. Police acknowledged publicly that no suspect had been identified and no arrest had been made. Residents expressed frustration, fear, and disbelief. Many said they had never imagined something like this could happen there. Patrols increased, and police reassured the public that the case remained active and a top priority. Ann Turner's life became central to the investigation, not just her death. Neighbors described her as kind, familiar, and deeply woven into daily community life. She was someone people expected to see, someone whose absence was immediately noticed. That familiarity made the crime harder to process. There was no known history of conflict, no public dispute, and no clear explanation for why she was targeted. As 2025 came to an end, investigators continued working quietly behind the scenes. Leads were followed, tips were evaluated, and evidence was re-examined. Authorities emphasized that cases involving elderly victims and limited physical evidence can be complex and slow-moving. Still, they made clear that the investigation was far from closed. In January 2026, marking 6 months since Ann Turner's murder, authorities made a renewed and public push for help. The Bucks County District Attorney's Office issued a fresh plea for information through social media, reminding the public that the case remains unsolved and active. The message was direct: someone out there may know something, even if it seems small or unimportant. Along with the renewed plea, officials confirmed that a $20,000 reward remains in place for information leading to an arrest and conviction. Investigators stressed that tips can be submitted anonymously and that even minor details could help move the case forward. The reward underscored how seriously authorities continue to treat the case and how determined they are to bring answers to Ann Turner's family and community. Police also made specific evidence requests as part of the January 2026 update. Authorities asked residents to review and submit any video footage from Rickert Road and Welcome House Road from the day of the murder. This includes doorbell cameras, home security systems, dash cameras, or any recording devices that may have captured movement in the area. Investigators believed that even footage showing routine traffic or pedestrians could help establish timelines or identify suspicious activity. That request highlighted a key reality of modern investigations. Crimes that once left few clues may now be surrounded by digital evidence. A passing car, a brief stop, or someone walking by at the wrong time could be captured on camera without anyone realizing its importance. Detectives hope that reviewing footage months later could reveal details missed in the immediate aftermath. Case 6. Gina Depietro's life ended inside her own apartment in western Pennsylvania. On April 16, 2025, police say Gina was asleep in her home at Creekside Manor when she was fatally shot. There was no public argument reported that night, no disturbance that sent neighbors rushing into the hallway. The crime unfolded in silence, discovered only later, and the stillness surrounding her death is part of what continues to trouble those who followed the case. Gina lived in Jackson Township, a community where violent crime is rare and where many residents know one another by name. When she did not show up for work and could not be reached, a welfare check was requested. Officers entered the apartment and found her deceased from gunshot wounds. Investigators quickly determined the shooting was a homicide. The detail that struck many residents was where Gina was found, in her own bed. A place associated with rest and privacy had become the scene of a killing, and the shock spread quickly through the township. As police worked the scene, attention turned to Gina's recent personal history. Authorities identified Daniel Platt, her 31-year-old ex-boyfriend, as the primary suspect. According to investigators, the relationship had already ended before April 16th. While police have not released every detail of their history, they confirmed there was a prior romantic connection and that Platt was believed to be responsible for the shooting. With that determination made, the case shifted from evidence collection to an urgent search. Pennsylvania State Police issued alerts and coordinated with neighboring jurisdictions as they tracked Platt's movements after the killing. Investigators said he left Butler County shortly after the shooting. For much of that day, the search stretched beyond the immediate area, raising concern among residents who followed updates closely. Law enforcement emphasized that locating Platt quickly was a priority, both to prevent further harm and to bring the case to a formal arrest. By later on April 16th, authorities located Platt in Beaver County. Before police could take him into custody, officials confirmed that Platt died by suicide. With his death, the criminal investigation came to an abrupt end. There would be no interrogation, no court filings, and no trial where evidence would be presented in public. The legal process stopped where it stood, leaving many questions unanswered for Gina's family and the wider community. From an investigative standpoint, police confirmed that no additional suspects were being sought and that there was no ongoing threat to the public. From a human standpoint, the conclusion felt incomplete. Cases that end this way often do. Without courtroom testimony, many of the why questions remain locked inside files that may never be fully opened to the public. What investigators could confirm, they did. The identity of the victim, the suspected shooter, and the timeline that connected the two. Friends and neighbors described Gina Depietro as a working woman who kept to herself but was kind to those around her. While authorities have not released extensive personal background details, tributes shared locally painted a picture of someone who valued routine, stability, and independence. That makes the manner of her death especially hard to accept for those who knew her. There was no indication that April 16th would be anything other than an ordinary day. Case 7. Judah Courtney became the central figure in one of Pennsylvania's most serious criminal cases of 2025 after 2 women were found dead inside a home in Carrolltown, Cambria County. On September 29, 2025, Pennsylvania State Police were sent to a residence on Flick Avenue for a welfare check. What officers discovered inside that house shifted the call from routine to tragic within minutes. Inside the home were the bodies of Olivia Courtney, age 32, and Ashley Cook, age 38. Both women were pronounced dead at the scene, and the investigation that followed quickly focused on Courtney, who was 14 years old at the time. The initial response began quietly. Welfare checks often end with officers confirming someone is safe. In this case, state troopers entered the home and found both women unresponsive. Emergency medical personnel confirmed there were no signs of life. The Cambria County coroner later determined that both victims suffered multiple stab wounds, and their deaths were ruled homicides. Investigators recovered 3 knives from inside the residence that were believed to be connected to the killings. Authorities made a point to clarify the facts early. No firearm was involved, and the deaths were not the result of a shooting. This distinction became important as the case spread beyond local news. Carrolltown is a small borough where serious violent crime is uncommon. As police vehicles lined Flick Avenue and crime scene tape surrounded the home, neighbors gathered at a distance, trying to understand what had happened. Law enforcement remained on scene for hours, documenting evidence and securing the house. Officials limited public statements during this stage, citing the need to protect the investigation and notify family members. As evidence was collected, attention turned toward Judah Courtney, who lived in the home. According to court documents, investigators began examining his actions and statements following the discovery of the bodies. Police allege that Courtney spoke with a neighbor shortly after the incident and made remarks that raised concern. Investigators also reviewed digital evidence, including messages and a video allegedly sent to a friend through social media. Prosecutors later said those communications referenced the killings and were included in the affidavit of probable cause. Based on the totality of the evidence, Judah Courtney was taken into custody and formally charged with 2 counts of criminal homicide, along with related offenses. Given the seriousness of the allegations, prosecutors elected to charge him as an adult under Pennsylvania law. During his initial court appearance, a judge ordered that Courtney be held without bail. The decision marked the beginning of a long pre-trial process, one that would involve legal arguments about jurisdiction, age, and responsibility. The victims' identities added weight to every court filing. Olivia Courtney was a parent, and her death left immediate family members grieving under intense public attention. Ashley Cook was identified as a close family friend who was inside the home at the time of the attack. Authorities have not publicly disclosed a motive, and prosecutors have avoided drawing conclusions outside the evidence presented in court. Their position has remained consistent. The case will be decided through testimony, forensic findings, and judicial review. As the investigation moved into the legal phase, officials worked to correct misinformation. State police repeatedly emphasized that the case involved stabbing injuries, not gunfire. Autopsy findings and physical evidence supported that conclusion. This clarity helped separate verified facts from rumors as the case gained wider attention across Pennsylvania. In late November 2025, the legal posture of the case became clearer. Despite early investigative reports that referenced statements allegedly made by Courtney, he entered a formal plea of not guilty to all charges. The plea confirmed that the case would proceed through contested hearings rather than early resolution. From that point forward, both sides began preparing for extended pretrial litigation. Court filings revealed that the defense strategy centers on jurisdiction. Courtney's attorneys are actively seeking to decertify the case from adult criminal court to juvenile court, a legal process permitted under Pennsylvania law when certain developmental and rehabilitative factors are argued. As part of that effort, the defense requested a private and sealed proceeding to review child welfare and juvenile records from Blair County, where Courtney previously had documented contact with social services. Prosecutors opposed aspects of the request, maintaining that the severity of the charges supports adult prosecution. Mental health considerations also entered the court record. Testimony in December 2025 confirmed that Courtney is receiving ongoing mental health care while detained, including weekly counseling sessions and monthly psychiatric evaluations. These services are being provided as part of detention protocols for juvenile defendants held in adult facilities. Judges acknowledged the evaluations as relevant to pretrial considerations, though no ruling has been issued on how they may affect jurisdiction or trial proceedings. Current status as of January 2026. Court records confirm that Judah Courtney's next scheduled court appearance is set for January 15, 2026. The hearing is expected to address outstanding pretrial motions, including arguments related to decertification, access to sealed records, and procedural matters. No trial date has been scheduled. As the case continues through the Cambria County court system, Judah Courtney remains presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty in a court of law. Case 8. Scott Warren Schaffer committed the murders of Kenneth Moore and Gregory Samoski in the early morning hours of January 8, 2025. Months before he would stand in a Pennsylvania courtroom to receive one of the most severe sentences the state can impose. According to investigators and court records, the killings occurred at Schaffer's own residence on Schaffer Lane. The location was not random. It was a private home, a place the victims entered willingly after an evening that initially appeared routine and uneventful. Earlier that night, Schaffer, Moore, and Samoski had been together at Ruby's Den Burgers and Spirits. Testimony later established that the 3 men spent time there socializing. Nothing in those moments suggested the violence that would follow. At some point during the evening, Schaffer invited Moore and Samoski back to his home. Court records show that Schaffer returned to his residence ahead of the victims. Prosecutors argued this detail was critical. During that window of time, Schaffer allegedly obtained an SKS-style rifle, preparing the weapon before Moore and Samoski arrived. The prosecution later emphasized that this sequence, leaving first, retrieving a firearm, and waiting, demonstrated intent and planning rather than impulse. When Moore and Samosky arrived at the house on Schaffer Lane in the early hours of January 8th, the situation turned deadly. Investigators testified that both men were shot inside the residence. There was no evidence of forced entry, no signs of a struggle consistent with a break-in. Prosecutors maintained that the victims were guests in the home, a fact that carried significant weight during trial. Police were dispatched to the residence at approximately 2:30 a.m. Officers arrived to find both Kenneth Moore and Gregory Samosky deceased. Each had suffered fatal gunshot wounds. The scene was secured, evidence was collected, and investigators began reconstructing the events that led up to the killings. Scott Warren Schaffer was arrested at the scene without incident. Court records confirm he was taken into custody immediately and arraigned later that same day, January 8, 2025. From the outset, authorities treated the case as a double homicide, and the investigation moved quickly into the court system. As the case progressed, prosecutors laid out a clear timeline for the jury: a night out at a local restaurant, an invitation back to Schaffer's home, Schaffer arriving first, a rifle obtained in advance, 2 men killed before dawn. That timeline became central to the prosecution's argument. They contended that Schaffer's actions were intentional, deliberate, and planned, meeting the legal standard for first-degree murder under Pennsylvania law. The defense attempted to challenge elements of the state's case, but prosecutors presented forensic evidence, witness testimony, and a detailed reconstruction of events that the jury ultimately found convincing. After hearing the evidence, the jury returned guilty verdicts on 2 counts of first-degree murder. Under Pennsylvania statutes, that verdict carried a mandatory sentence: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. With 2 victims, the court also had discretion to determine whether the sentences would run concurrently or consecutively. That decision came months later. On November 14, 2025, Schaffer stood before a judge in a Pennsylvania courtroom for sentencing. The atmosphere was solemn as relatives of the victims listened. When the ruling was delivered, it left no ambiguity. Schaffer was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. The structure of the sentence ensured that each victim's death was recognized separately and that Schaffer would never be eligible for release. The judge confirmed that the severity of the sentence was not optional. First-degree murder in Pennsylvania mandates life imprisonment without parole. Given the presence of 2 victims and the findings of intent and planning, the court ordered the sentences to be served back-to-back, eliminating any possibility of overlap or future parole hearings. Case 9. Santiago Payano Sanchez, age 63, was still inside the family home on October 5, 2025, when the gunfire ended. Within minutes, investigators say he began making phone calls. He contacted his daughter and a cousin, apologizing and admitting that he had shot everybody in the house. By the time police arrived at the residence in the 2100 block of Oak Hollow Drive in West Hempfield Township, 2 women were dead. His adult son was critically wounded, and 2 young children were inside the home where the violence had just unfolded. Despite being estranged from his wife, Ana Gutierrez Sedano, 59, Payano Sanchez was still living at the same address. According to investigators, the couple had separated emotionally but continued to reside in the home, sleeping in separate bedrooms. Family tension had been ongoing, and the separation had not resulted in one partner moving out. That living arrangement placed multiple generations under the same roof on the day everything went wrong. Also, inside the home was Dominga Sedano, 74. While some early reports referred to her as Ana's sister, the Lancaster County District Attorney's Office later clarified that Dominga was Ana's aunt. She was present in the home at the time of the confrontation, along with 2 children, ages 2 and 7, who were also living there. According to police, the confrontation escalated inside the residence. During the dispute, Payano Sanchez produced a firearm and began shooting. Investigators later confirmed that the weapon used was lawfully owned and that Payano Sanchez held a valid concealed carry permit at the time. Authorities emphasized that the legality of the firearm did not lessen the severity of the crimes alleged. Ana Gutierrez Sedano was shot and suffered fatal injuries. Dominga Sedano was also shot and critically wounded. Both women were pronounced dead inside the home despite emergency response efforts. The violence did not end with them. Payano Sanchez also shot his 33-year-old son, Luis Payano, during the same incident. Luis was struck in the abdomen and rushed to a hospital, where he underwent emergency surgery. Doctors were able to save his life. Authorities later confirmed that Luis survived, making him the third shooting victim in the case. When officers arrived at the Oak Hollow Drive residence, they secured the scene and took Payano Sanchez into custody without further violence. Police later confirmed that the suspect had superficial self-inflicted injuries following the shooting. He was treated medically before being transported into police custody. Investigators did not describe the injuries as life-threatening. Inside the home, officers also located the two young children. Authorities confirmed that the children were not physically injured, but they had been present during the shooting. Child welfare officials were immediately notified, and the children were removed from the home and placed into protective care. Officials stressed that ensuring the children's safety was a top priority once the scene was secured. As investigators processed the scene, they began reconstructing the timeline. Evidence collected inside the residence, combined with phone records and witness statements, painted a clearer picture of what happened after the gunfire stopped. Prosecutors later confirmed that Payano Sanchez's phone calls to family members, where he apologized and admitted to shooting everyone inside the house, were documented and would be central to the case. Prosecutors moved quickly to file charges. Payano Sanchez was charged with 2 counts of criminal homicide for the deaths of Ana and Dominga. In connection with the shooting of his son, he was also charged with attempted criminal homicide and aggravated assault. Officials stated that the additional charges reflected both the seriousness of Luis Payano's injuries and the intent alleged by investigators. As the case became public, neighbors in West Hempfield Township expressed shock. Many described the area as quiet and family-oriented. The fact that the shooting occurred inside a home where family members were still living together, even while estranged, added to the community's unease. Law enforcement officials acknowledged that domestic conflicts can escalate rapidly, especially when unresolved tension builds over time. Authorities were careful not to speculate about motive beyond what could be supported by evidence. They confirmed the shooting was domestic in nature and involved family members, but emphasized that motive would ultimately be addressed in court. The presence of children continued to weigh heavily on the case. Officials confirmed that while the children were unharmed physically, they had been exposed to extreme violence at a very young age. Child advocates noted that such exposure can have long-term emotional effects, even when no physical injuries are present. As court proceedings moved forward, the home on Oak Hollow Drive became a quiet symbol of loss. Flowers appeared nearby. Conversations in the community shifted toward awareness of domestic violence and the importance of intervention before conflicts turned deadly. Case 10, Hamid Boyd, age 19, was killed on Sunday, November 30, 2025, at approximately 6:08 p.m. at the intersection of Powell Street and Spruce Street. What appeared at first to be another street shooting in Montgomery County quickly became one of the county's most serious and complex murder investigations of the year, one that prosecutors say was driven by a long-running gang feud, planned and carried out with coordination. Emergency calls came in almost immediately after the gunfire. Officers arrived to find Boyd suffering from fatal gunshot wounds. Despite rapid medical attention, he was pronounced dead at the scene. The intersection was shut down as detectives began collecting shell casings, canvassing witnesses, and securing surveillance footage from nearby buildings and traffic cameras. Even in those first hours, investigators indicated the shooting did not appear random. As detectives reconstructed the moments leading up to the attack, a broader picture began to emerge. Prosecutors later stated that Boyd's killing was linked directly to a gang feud involving two Norristown area groups. According to court filings, the suspects were associated with a group known as the 1200s, while Boyd was allegedly affiliated with a rival group known as the Ave. Authorities emphasized that the shooting was not spontaneous, but rather the result of escalating tensions between the two sides. Investigators traced the roots of the violence to online activity. One of the most critical pieces of evidence in the case came from social media. Prosecutors revealed that 2 days before the murder, the suspects posted a photo online showing themselves with a firearm, accompanied by a threatening caption aimed directly at the Ave. That post, authorities say, was not idle talk. It became a key element in establishing intent, planning, and motive. Detectives analyzed the post alongside other digital evidence, including communications and movement data. Prosecutors later argued that the social media activity demonstrated both awareness and preparation, reinforcing their claim that Boyd was deliberately targeted. The post would later be cited repeatedly in court documents as evidence supporting conspiracy and premeditation. On the street level, investigators followed physical evidence as well. Surveillance footage from the area captured a white Chevrolet Cruze leaving the scene immediately after the shooting. That vehicle became a focal point of the investigation. Detectives tracked its movements through additional cameras, eventually identifying it as the getaway car used by the suspects. The Chevrolet Cruze was later located and impounded, providing investigators with further physical evidence tied to the case. In the days following the shooting, detectives worked methodically, combining witness statements, video footage, vehicle data, and digital evidence. By December 2025, Montgomery County authorities announced significant breakthroughs. Mark Fields, 18, and Theodore Adams, 17, were arrested and charged in connection with Boyd's killing. Prosecutors confirmed that Adams, despite being a minor, was charged as an adult due to the seriousness of the allegations. Authorities also identified a third suspect, Zeker Washington, 20. Like Fields and Adams, Washington was charged in connection with the murder, but unlike the others, he was not in custody. As of late December 2025, Washington remained at large, prompting continued public appeals and an active manhunt. Court records outlined the full scope of the charges. All three suspects, Fields, Adams, and Washington, were charged with first-degree murder, second-degree murder, and conspiracy to commit murder, along with multiple weapons offenses. Prosecutors stated that the layered charges reflected the alleged planning, coordination, and shared intent behind the shooting. The conspiracy charge, in particular, leaned heavily on the combination of social media threats, group affiliation, and coordinated movement, including the use of the Chevrolet Cruze as a getaway vehicle. Prosecutors argued that the evidence showed agreement among the suspects before the shooting took place. As Fields and Adams remained in custody awaiting court proceedings, investigators intensified efforts to locate Washington. Law enforcement agencies distributed updated photos and descriptions. On January 6, 2026, authorities confirmed that Washington was still wanted and warned that he may have cut his dreadlocks in an attempt to change his appearance and avoid identification. Officials urged the public not to approach him and to contact police with any information. The case drew attention across Montgomery County because of the ages involved. Boyd was 19, Fields was 18, Adams was 17, Washington was 20. Prosecutors acknowledged the weight of bringing such serious charges against young defendants, but emphasized that the evidence pointed to deliberate action rather than impulsive violence. Authorities were careful to stress that all defendants are presumed innocent unless proven guilty in court. Still, they made clear that the case against the suspects was built on multiple layers of evidence, digital, physical, and testimonial, collected over weeks of investigation. By the end of 2025, the case stood out as one of the most shocking murder investigations tied to Pennsylvania that year, not only because a young man was killed, but because prosecutors alleged the shooting was the result of an ongoing gang feud fueled by online threats and carried out with planning and coordination. As of January 6, 2026, the case remains active. 2 suspects are in custody. 1 remains at large. Multiple murder and conspiracy charges are pending. And a young man's life ended at 6:08 p.m. on Sunday, November 30th, 2025, at a street corner that will forever be tied to his name. Case 11. Diogenes Archangel Ortiz's actions turned an ordinary Saturday morning into one of the most disturbing crime scenes Pennsylvania faced in 2025. On February 22, 2025, shortly after 10:35 a.m., Archangel Ortiz entered the ICU at UPMC Memorial Hospital in York County. He carried a 9mm semi-automatic pistol and zip ties, items that immediately signaled intent rather than accident. The ICU is a place reserved for the most fragile patients in the hospital, people whose lives depend on calm, precision, and constant care. That morning, those expectations collapsed in seconds. Archangel Ortiz went directly into the ICU and began taking hospital employees hostage. Investigators later confirmed the unit was deliberately targeted, not randomly chosen. Inside were doctors, nurses, custodial staff, and patients who were critically ill and often unable to move on their own. Once inside the unit, Archangel Ortiz opened fire. 3 hospital workers were shot, a doctor, a nurse, and a custodian. Each of them was simply doing their job, unaware that their workplace was about to become a battlefield. The sound of gunfire echoed through hallways designed for quiet, while patients lay helpless just feet away. As panic spread, hospital staff outside the ICU rushed to activate emergency procedures. Doors were locked. Visitors were ushered away. Medical teams worked to move patients out of harm's reach where possible, even as uncertainty filled the building. Calls went out to law enforcement, and officers from multiple agencies responded, knowing they were heading into an active hostage situation inside a hospital. Inside the ICU, the danger continued. Archangel Ortiz restrained at least 1 employee with zip ties. According to official reports, when he later emerged from the ICU, he was using a female nurse as a human shield, her hands zip-tied, held directly in front of him. This detail would later become one of the most chilling aspects of the case. The nurse's life was visibly at risk as officers confronted the gunman, who appeared fully armed and willing to continue shooting. Police officers moved carefully, balancing speed with restraint. They were fully aware that a wrong decision could cost the life of a hostage or a patient nearby. During the response, West York Borough Police Officer Andrew Duarte, age 30, was fatally wounded. Investigators later determined that he was killed by friendly fire during the intense exchange as officers attempted to stop the gunman and rescue hostages. His death added a devastating loss to an already unfolding tragedy and sent shockwaves through the law enforcement community. In addition to Officer Duarte's death, 2 other police officers were wounded by gunfire during the confrontation. The violence did not stop there. Beyond the 3 hospital employees who were shot, a 4th hospital worker was injured in a fall while trying to escape the danger. By the time the incident ended, the list of victims included healthcare workers, police officers, and hospital staff who never expected to face life-threatening danger at work. The confrontation reached its breaking point when officers engaged Archangel Ortiz as he emerged from the ICU with the restrained nurse. Police fired, killing him and ending the threat. Only later did investigators discover a critical detail. The gunman's weapon was actually empty during the final confrontation. Officers on the scene did not know this at the time. From their perspective, he remained an immediate and deadly threat, especially while using a hostage as a shield. This revelation would later fuel difficult discussions about perception, split-second decision-making, and the realities faced by officers responding to active threats. Once the gunman was down, emergency crews rushed in. The injured doctor, nurse, and custodian were transported for treatment. Wounded officers received medical care, and the hospital began the long process of accounting for every patient and staff member. The ICU, once focused on healing, became a secured crime scene. Families waited anxiously for updates, some learning that loved ones were injured, others facing irreversible loss. In the hours and days that followed, investigators worked to understand why the attack happened. Authorities confirmed that Archangel Ortiz had recent personal contact with the ICU related to a medical situation involving someone close to him. While officials did not release every detail, they made clear that the attack was targeted, not random. The focus on the ICU raised urgent concerns about hospital access, visitor screening, and staff safety. The impact on the community was immediate and profound. Vigils were held for Officer Andrew Duarte, remembered as a dedicated public servant who ran toward danger to protect others. Hospital leaders praised the courage of medical staff who continued caring for patients under extreme stress. In response to the attack, UPMC Memorial Hospital made significant security changes. Officials confirmed that the hospital installed metal detectors and implemented restricted access systems, especially in sensitive areas like the ICU. These measures were designed to prevent weapons from entering the facility and to better control movement within the hospital. While these changes came after tragedy struck, they marked a clear shift in how hospital safety is approached. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe to my channel.